And what's your name?
Dave Oceanvine.
And what are we looking at here, Dave?
Shakespeare Ghost Town.
Why Shakespeare?
Well, I'll give you that when I give you the history. How about that?
Ooh, I can't wait.
What got things going here first was a small spring. There was a small spring in the wash on the other side of town. It was a clean and reliable spring. Because of the small spring in 1856, the Army would put the first building here. This would be a military relay station for the Army. And in 1935, a Texas cowboy by the name of Frank Hill and his wife Rita would purchase the town as a cattle ranch. In 1939, their daughter Janna would be born. Janna would be raised here. And as Janna grew up, she would move away to do her thing, which would be some actressing, some dancing, and some modeling in New York, Denver, and in California. In the 1960s, Frank's health would decline on him, and Janna's mother, Rita, would find herself trying to take care of the town, the ranch, and Frank. So she would give Janna an ultimatum. If Janna wanted to continue with her career, she had her mother's blessing. But if she wanted to keep this ranch, she was going to have to come back home to help. Janna wouldn't hesitate. Janna would give up her career and come back home to help her parents. And at that point, that white building by the gate was being used as a home in Lordsburg. They would purchase that building, they would move it up here, it would be converted into a dance studio, and Janna would get to continue her career by teaching dance to the local girls in that building for the next 30 years. Janna was a fascinating, amazing lady. In 1984, she would marry a gentleman by the name of Manny Hogue, and together they would preserve the history together until Janna passed away in 2005 of cancer. And then Manny would pass away May of 2018, which is the reason I'm here. Manny had been previously married in Ohio. I married his daughter, so when he got ill, we moved here to keep the place going. The little tiny building there that looks like a little shed has its own little story as well. In 1973, Highway 10 was being constructed. Highway 10 was cutting a northern pasture off from the ranch, and there were no provisions for any easements under the highway. Janna did not want this highway going through her property, so she would write some letters to the state protesting the highway. These letters, however, would be ignored. So with the help of some friends, that little building there suddenly appeared down where exit 20 is today, right in the middle of where they wanted to do construction. So when they arrived in the morning, standing in the doorway of that building was Janna's mother, Rita, holding a rifle, daring them to come remove her. She would hold off the construction of this highway for 3 months. During that time, she didn't give the workers a hard time because it wasn't their fault, they were just doing their jobs. But after 3 months, the warrant came out for her arrest, and she was arrested. And the state was so mad at that point, they ordered the building to be demolished. The workers, though, having such respect for her, had other ideas. Instead of destroying the building like they were ordered, they dragged it out of the way, and it sat over there on a hill overlooking that exit up until it was moved here in 2013. But the building's known as Rita's Last Stand or Rita's Shack. Now this is the main street of the town here. This street would go much farther to the south than it does today, to the north, than it does today, and it eventually would tee off with another road and go left and right. Now where they salted the diamonds is that sharp peak up there, that's Lee's Peak. And during the third mining boom here, they ran a rail line right through the center of town. And this is what's left of the rail bed. The town never had any schools, it never had any churches. There was never any law enforcement like a sheriff in this town. The law enforcement was always vigilante or militia. They did, however, have 16 different saloons that we know of or have stories of during that first mining boom. 3,000 miners, primarily men. Yeah. Every one of these adobe structures are original buildings. And this is the last saloon that still stands. This is the Grant House stage station. This room was constructed during the first mining boom by stagekeeper John Evanston as a way to make extra money from the stagecoach passengers. And they say the boys in here get bored drinking and bet each other who could shoot flies. But the tin on the roofs didn't arrive till the second mining boom. The railroad brought the tin.
Nice.
Previous to that, most of the roofs on these buildings were flat yucca stock latia roofs. You would have dirt over the yucca stalks, and you would line the ceilings with linen. And you'll see examples as we go through the various buildings. The only alcohol you could get in here would be primarily whiskey. Beer needs to be pasteurized to travel. That really wasn't that common. You might get lucky and get wine, and this wouldn't be sipping whiskey either. This would be shooting whiskey. Yeah, during that first mining boom, there was no railroad. It was only stagecoaches and freight wagons and stuff like that. This is the stage station. This room was originally constructed in 1859. In 1865, when stagekeeper John Evanston arrived out here after the Civil War to reopen this building, this room we're standing in was the entire building. During that first mining boom, he added the saloon on to make extra money from the stagecoach passengers. He would also add the front dining room on to accommodate more stagecoach traffic. By the 1970s, this room was in bad shape. Janna would have to get some friends together, and they would redo the whole back section of the building and also redo the yucca stock latia roof you see above your head. But even the floors in here, they're just adobe floors. Same stuff that the walls are made out of. It looks like concrete, doesn't it? It's hard like concrete.
Yeah.
Some of the things that you'd have around for the time are on the table here. Dutch oven. You know what a Dutch oven is, right?
Yep.
About a coal iron.
Haven't seen one of those before, but it makes sense.
Yeah. Hot coal right in it. This is a 1920s, 1930s waffle iron.
Nice.
This one was patented in 1922. I know that because it says it on the lid.
It says it on it.
It literally does, right there.
This cast iron looks almost like
Yeah,
yours.
yeah.
It hasn't really changed much.
No.
It turns out cast iron's cast iron.
Coffee grinder.
Grinder.
Coffee grinder. Washboard. A grater.
Huh.
As you can see, this not only served as a dining room for the stagecoach passengers, this did also serve as the hanging room.
Yikes.
The lack of tall trees in this area, you needed a place to stretch someone's neck, this would become the room. We don't know how many people were hung in here for sure. There are varying accounts depending on whose accounts you'd really like to believe. We do know for sure who the last two guests of honor were though. They were Sandy King and Russian Bill Tettenborn, and they were both hung in this room in 1881. Russian Bill had arrived out here with a hunting party, and he liked his prospects, and he decided he would stay. He must have been somewhat trusted. He was working as a claims recorder for some of the miners here. Unfortunately, a couple miners showed up here and accused him of robbing them out of their mining claim. Very serious charges if your job was to record their claims. The local militia would get together. They would decide there was some truth to the matter and decided they were going to hang him for this. Sandy King, he had arrived with the first mining boom. Like Curly Bill Brocious, he was hired by the mining companies to help protect their interests. And he had simply stayed around after the mining companies no longer needed his services. Now, Sandy didn't do just one thing that was bad enough to get himself hung. It was an accumulation of things with Sandy. He had been a thorn in society for several years. And the morning before he was hung, he went to the general merchandise and he purchased himself a silk handkerchief. And in doing so, the clerk found it rather amusing that the tough cowboy was going to buy himself the silk handkerchief, so he was poking fun at him a little bit. Sandy, being the type of gentleman he was, he didn't take very kindly to being made fun of and thought he would teach the clerk a lesson. When the clerk went to hand him the handkerchief, Sandy grabbed him by the arm and shot one of his fingers off. This was a bad mistake by Sandy. That clerk happened to be very well liked in town. Sandy, however, had been a thorn in society for several years. The local militia would get together. They'd already decided they were hanging Russian Bill. They got to thinking about all the things that Sandy had done and just figured they might as well hang Sandy at the same time. That way they could just throw him in the same hole. The digging out here is not easy, and the one standing rule they did have in town is if you killed someone, you had to bury them. That did help keep a lot of the indiscriminate killings down. No one wanted to have to dig the hole, given the hard and rocky nature of this ground. These two gentlemen, however, would hear about this little party they're about to be invited to, and they would make things much worse. They would jump on two horses that didn't belong to them and tried to ride out of town. Horse thievery also was not tolerated in the 1800s. These two would be gathered back up, they would be brought in here, and they would be hung. This would be a horrible place to be hung. This is not a drop you and break your neck. This is a pull you up and tie you off or just kick the chair out from underneath you. The local militia members would all just stand around in here and wait till these two men quit struggling. Then these guys would all go back to their homes. Stagekeeper John Evanston would just go back to his bed in the back room, and this is where the men would hang. They wanted to make an example of these two. What they didn't plan on, though, was a stagecoach rolling up and the passengers getting off and coming in here expecting to get something to eat. They would first have to help cut these two men down, drag them outside, and lay them beside the building before the tables were pushed back in. On the stagecoach was a stringer. Now, a stringer in the 1800s was a reporter. He would travel the trains and the stagecoaches and collect stories, and when he got to a telegraph office, he would string the stories back. He got to bugging John about the two dead men. He wanted to know what these two men did, and he wanted to know the full details of this hanging. Well, let's face it, this was technically a lynching. Remember, there's no sheriff here. There's also no judge. These gentlemen didn't get proper trials. John didn't want to talk about it. He didn't want to get anyone in any trouble. And John's busy trying to do his job by trying to feed the other passengers here, and that stringer's following John around, badgering him. After a while, John gets mad because this guy won't leave him alone. Turns to the stringer and says, "Russian Bill stole a horse," and of course he did. Sandy King? Sandy King was just a damn nuisance. We don't think he asked very many more questions after that. He kind of went about his way. They do say that you can see those ropes sometimes in the middle of the night when you cross by these windows, so you can see the ropes in here swinging. I haven't noticed that, but you know what, to be quite honest with you, I don't wander around too much here in the middle of the night because it gets pretty dark out here at times unless the moon's full. Yep. The stars are amazing here at night when the sky is clear. We got stuff like coyotes and bobcats and stuff that roam this area. So Mr. Boyle did have a sense of humor about him. When he was busy renaming the town Shakespeare, the street we're walking down became Avon Avenue. This building behind me became the Stratford. And Billy the Kid would wash dishes here after breaking jail in Silver City after robbing the Chinese laundry and escaping through the chimney. When he got here, he needed supplies to make it into Arizona. He was too small to work the mines, so they put him to work washing dishes and sweeping floors just to earn the supplies, earn the money for the supplies to make it into Arizona. He hadn't killed anybody at this point. He was just a petty thief at this point. Now this is the parlor, and the two young girls on the table there are Emma and Ella Marble. Emma and Ella arrived here in 1882 with their family. Emma and Ella would grow up here, and they would run, their family would run this hotel for many years. Emma, as she grew up, she would get married and become Emma Marble Muir, and she'd become the first historian for this town because, well, this is her history. She lived it. She'd go on and write several articles about the history of this town. John Evanston, the stagekeeper, he would get ill in 1887. The Marbles would try to care for him in that next room. He died in that room of heart trouble. His picture's up on the wall on the right, and the bed is the bed he died in. All the furniture in these two rooms actually belong to the Marbles. There are 4 bedrooms above our heads. Each one of those bedrooms would have 2 or 3 beds in them. When you stayed at a hotel like this in the 1800s, you didn't necessarily get a room to yourself or a bed to yourself. If you were lucky enough to get a bed, more often than not, you'd have to share it with someone else. And it could be someone you don't know. The family that lived that ran the hotel, this was their living quarters, this one room. Yep, earthquake. Earthquake did that.
Gotcha.
The neat thing about adobe is we could tear that wall down, reuse all that adobe, and just build the wall back up. Yep, you could reuse it. I mean, it's just dirt and sand. You were moving stuff around with a horse and buggy. Why did people have headboards that giant during that time? Think about that for a minute. Yeah. It was hard enough to move stuff around, yet you have that giant headboard. You can see what's left of the cloth ceiling in here. The cloth would serve a couple purposes. Not only would it help keep any dirt out of your food, it would also help reflect light. Drywall didn't exist at that time. You'd get your eggs in boxes like on the one on the windowsill, packed in sawdust. Cardboard and plastic didn't exist at that time. Little pepper grinder on the molding there. The stove's very neat. You see how it has its warmer up top? It also has all these neat little flaps to help keep stuff heated as well. Cupboard like that one would serve as your refrigerator. You throw a door over that cupboard, it would help at least keep stuff cooler than room temperature. Adobe's an excellent insulator. You feel it's a little cooler in the buildings than it is outside. But one of the stories I tell in this building is called Death Over an Egg. And it's an event that happened in this room in 1879 at the beginning of that second mining boom. One of the local miners that used to come in here was a miner by the name of Fred Beanbelly Smith. Now, Beanbelly was a married miner, but his wife did not like to cook, so he would come in here to eat quite often. And he would sit at the end of the table down there, and he came in one morning, sat at the end of the table down there. His breakfast came out, and it probably consisted of, I don't know, an antelope steak or some salted pork with some oatmeal, a cup of coffee, maybe a biscuit. He's sitting there eating his breakfast. A little while later, Mrs. Wood's son Ross comes downstairs. Sits a few seats down there from Beanbelly. His breakfast comes out. It's the exact same thing that Beanbelly has, except for there's a small saucer with a solitary fried egg dead center of it. Beanbelly spies that egg, calls the waiter over, and wants to know, hey, why does Ross get an egg and the rest of us don't? Waiter kindly explained to him that this was the last egg in the house, and Mrs. Wood said that egg was to go to her son Ross. That didn't sit real well with Beanbelly. He didn't like Ross, and he starts harassing Ross, questioning Ross's integrity, his manhood. You know, I could go on, but he was really giving Ross a hard time, but even going as far as threatening Ross with a lead chaser should he take a bite of this egg. Well, Ross puts up with the verbal abuse for a little while, but then he gets tired of it. He gets up out of his chair, he goes through that door into his room. Meanwhile, Beanbelly's still down at the end of the table, spouting off how the world should be according to Beanbelly. Ross wasn't playing around, however. He had went and got his pistol.
I was going to say, he went to get his gun.
And he stepped through that side door there, and he lined up, and he took a couple shots at Beanbelly. Unfortunately for poor Ross, this must have been his first gunfight because he had missed. And before he could get another shot off, Beanbelly would get one off of his own, and his shot would ring true. He would hit Ross square in the chest and kill him instantly in between these two doors here. Nothing ever happened to Beanbelly. He's not the one that shot first. He was literally just defending himself. Ross would be taken and buried in that cemetery you all passed on your way up here. His mother and his sister would tend his grave. And a year later, when the railroad went through, one of the first things off of the railroad was a marble marker for Ross Woods. He would get the distinction of having the very first marble marker in that cemetery down there over that egg. And if you're wondering why Beanbelly didn't like Ross, the rumor around town at that time was when Beanbelly would be away working in the mines, Ross would be making little trips to see Mrs. Beanbelly. That'd do it.
Yeah, that would do it.
This is the old Army mail station. This side of the building was constructed in 1856. This side of the building was added on to it in about 1858. The Army would use this building until the telegraph became prevalent, and then they would abandon the building, and then after that, families, plural, would use this as a home. The reason I don't want you going in this side, if you look up, you see it has its old yucca stock latia roof on it, with dirt on it still. And I always worry that that may fall and hurt someone. That's why I don't allow anyone in that side. Now I do allow you in this side though. Creepy door and all. The furniture in here is very neat. It's a reproduction of 1850s camp furniture. See how it's put together without nails? You could take this all apart, lay it flat on your wagon, and when you get to where you're going, you just reassemble all of it. So this is the Assayer's office. This building was ready to fall down in the 1980s. And Manny would get some people together. They would redo you'd re-pour the walls back out to their proper thickness and redo this entire building. This is a chunk of slag from the rail bed that a 10-year-old brought to me. But if this was your rock out of your mining claim and it had minerals and metals in it, you needed to get it assayed by the assayer. You'd bring it in and give it to him. He would weigh it up on the scale, and then he would take that hammer there. It's heavy, much heavier than you think it is. And he would pulverize that rock into a powder. Then he would put it into a crucible like this. Take the crucible, stick it in the assay furnace, and he would heat it up and melt it down. Then he would extract the various minerals and metals from one another by using things like arsenic and cyanide and mercury. Then after he separated all the minerals and metals from one another, he'd weigh each of them up in this scale, figure out how many ounces of each you could expect to get per ton of ore. Then he'd write you out a report on your mining claim. You would have this report to take to present to maybe other potential investors, or even a bigger mining company you're trying to convince to buy your mining claim from you. Now this is our blacksmith shop. This would be the blacksmith shop for the National Mail and Transportation Company. This building would be basically their repair building for the stagecoaches. This building actually, it operated up until the late 1880s. This is like the most amazing blacksmith shop I've ever seen myself. I mean, this is an amazing.
I could live here.
But that giant thing there hanging off of with the chain from that beam, that's Manny's version of the bear trap. It looks like a dinosaur trap. Manny often did joke it was for the IRS. It's still not big enough for the IRS. It's too big for a bear and not big enough for the IRS. Lay the money on there. Yeah, come and get it. But just a neat item. We leave it hang there. No one's ever dared set that thing. One of the other things I like to talk about in here is there's a bucket hanging down there off of a hook that looks like a funnel. Has anyone seen one of those before? Never seen a cone bucket? Well, that bucket there is actually called a fire bucket. And there's a reason that fire buckets, are shaped like cones. There were never any fire extinguishers in the 1800s. And you always wanted to have a bucket around to help you put out a fire. Unfortunately, if you had a bucket like the one sitting on the ground in here, sooner or later someone would someone would come through here and they're going to need a bucket for something. Then you're not going to have one anymore. They're going to steal your bucket. But if you shape that bucket like a cone, no one wants to steal that one because they can't set it down without it tipping over. That's why fire buckets are shaped like cones. There was a movie filmed here, though, in the 1990s called Holliday, the Man, the Legend. And when they were filming that movie, they needed a place that looked like a mine. This was their idea of a mine. So they took one of our ore cars from over there that I made sure I pointed out, and they moved it over here, and put a set of tracks under it to make it look like a mine for the movie. In reality, this is a powder magazine, and this is really what it is. And this thing's been redone a couple of times throughout the years, but you get the gist of what it was.
Yeah.
There's even a fake stick of dynamite in there. Yeah.